Okay, so we started with what's new since 1940 or 1492. 1942 was a good year also. But as we move forward here, hopefully this will go. Okay. She's a little slow today. In part one, we looked at number and kinds of tribes, who's an Indian, tribal membership, tribal populations, Indian as a name, the U.S. Constitutional Foundation for Tribal Sovereignty, and cultural traditions, and we kind of focused on quill work. Ooh. Let's see what happens here. This, I'm hoping, is not indicative of the rest of the night, but in part two, I shared some personal background information growing up as an Indian person in Rapid City, South Dakota. We talked about some cultural traditions, including contributions, feathers, and star quilts. We discussed the barrel model of culture and how it can be used to understand the different tribal groups in America. And those tribal groups are best studied in 8 cultural study areas, CSAs. We talked about some personalities. I shared 5 or 6 of them with you. And we started this discussion on tribal sovereignty and casinos and finished with a breakdown of the Dakota Nation, which is an example of the kind of breakdown you can do from almost every tribe in America. Tonight, we're going to look at poverty, tribal government operations, cultural appropriation, looking at mascots, cultural appropriation, taking a quick peek at product packaging, and celebrations. Poverty. American Indian people are amongst the poorest of the poor in America. How do we know? The census is required by the US Constitution to take account of everybody every 10 years. They report this data out at the county level every 10 years. Census county data puts about 3 or 4 of the poorest counties in America as counties that are contiguous with or mostly composed of the boundaries of Indian reservations. Decade after decade, these South Dakota counties often lead the top of the list. Shannon County and Ziebach County. And Shannon County is the Pine Ridge Reservation. That's one of the reasons so many people have heard of Pine Ridge. They're the poorest place in America. Cheyenne River Reservation makes up a big portion of Ziebach County. These counties are among the poorest counties in America, decade after decade. Poverty is a symptom of larger issues, and these larger issues are much harder to solve and include constant high unemployment rates on the reservation, alcoholism and high frequency of accidents, adolescent suicide and abuse. And the most recent thing happening in a number of reservations are missing Indian women. They're just gone. Homelessness and overcrowded conditions. High dropout rates, low graduation rates. These are symptoms. And the causes are very, very difficult and sometimes hard to understand. Unemployment exists because no jobs exist due to a lack of an economic foundation at the reservation level. Family dysfunction causes a lot of the adolescent issues, and that dysfunction was created by forced cultural change during the reservation period, typically between the mid-1800s and 1930s. Lack of housing is just plain due to lack of funding. You can't build if you don't have any money. Lack of health care, lack of mental health resources. The nearest hospital from the Pine Ridge Reservation is almost 5 hours away. Boarding school experiences and the failure of education makes it very difficult for education to gain a foothold on reservations. Growing up on a reservation is to attempt to thrive and survive in extremely difficult circumstances. Poverty is not a cultural issue. Poverty is an economic issue. And economic solutions are not easy on a reservation. We're going to look at tribal government. As noted by the BIA, tribes possess all powers of self-government except those relinquished under treaty, extinguished by Congress, or defined by the courts. Quote, tribes therefore possess the right to form their own governments, to make and enforce laws both civil and criminal, to tax, to establish and determine membership, to license and regulate activities within their jurisdiction, to zone, and to exclude persons from tribal lands. In many instances, tribes have the same limitations as states on what they can or cannot do. The exercise of tribal sovereign rights has and continues to be a source of friction in states in which tribal reservations exist. And I know for a fact that's true in South Dakota and in Minnesota. Two of the focuses of what we're talking about for purposes of my having this opportunity to talk to you. Land and the authority over it becomes a source of contention between tribes and states. Tribal governments have sole authority over what happens on their property. Tribal government constitutions were mandated and approved by Congress under the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. Treaties are essentially real estate transactions. This is the basis for so many of the things that are happening in tribal governments. Treaties are essentially real estate transactions. Treaties created reservations, with reservation property being designated as federal property in terms of trust. Reservation designation resulted in the loss of a tax base for states. Treaties created a need for trust responsibility between tribes and the federal government. So treaties and trust responsibilities are inextricably interconnected. Trust responsibility, as defined by the BIA, quote, the federal Indian trust responsibility is a legally enforceable fiduciary obligation on the part of the United States to protect tribal treaty rights, lands, assets, and resources, as well as a duty to carry out the mandates of federal law with respect to American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages, unquote. Trust responsibility is literally defined legally. As noted by the BIA, quote, federal Indian reservations are generally exempt from state jurisdiction, including taxation, except when Congress specifically authorizes such jurisdiction. As we noted in Part 1, Congress has plenary power over Indian tribes. No other group of people have this special relationship with the federal government. This also includes federal legislation that only affects members of federally recognized tribes. Tribal governments are managed by elected officials who typically serve on a tribal council or some other similar format, who must be a member of the tribe and who operate under a tribal constitution approved and mandated by Congress. Where does the money come from for tribal operations? Tribes have no extra money to use for investments, except for the few with successful casinos. And out of those 300 tribes culturally that we talked about in Part 1, there's only about 20 to 25 that have any extra money from their casino activities. There are no major commercial ventures on any reservation to generate taxable income. No jobs on a reservation means no taxes paid, no consumer buying power exists. Tribal governments operate on funding from the federal government. Most of this funding stems from the federal trust responsibility created by treaties, and those treaties were created from the taking of Indian land. Congressional funding for tribal operations is not free money given for their welfare. It is part of the trust responsibility carried out by the BIA for the benefit and protection of remaining tribal resources. It's deeply rooted in the loss of millions of acres of tribal land, mostly an uncompensated loss. Tribes rely on the federal government to fully fund the BIA for these services. We talked about some of the issues in poverty earlier. Roads and infrastructure. Education. Should be noted that the BIA operate the only national schools in America. Health services. The Indian Health Service is responsible for hospitals, clinics, and staffing, many of which are desperately needed on reservations. Housing. Funding that is provided can be used to build and maintain homes, and there's simply not enough of it. Food. Commodity programs for people who have no money to buy food and no place to go buy it if they had the money. Crime prevention and protection. Tribal courts and tribal police have to coordinate their efforts with the FBI because there is no state jurisdiction on Indian property. Tribes are in a constant state of reallocating limited funds and resources to meet the needs of their members. The federal government more and more fails to pass a yearly budget and relies on continuing resolutions. When this happens, tribes are unable to plan for or to execute their own budgets. Dependency on federal funding limits or eliminates the possibility of developing 5 or 10-year plans for tribal improvements. Indian people are among the poorest of the poor. Congress approves funding for tribal governments in order to carry out their trust responsibility to tribes. Tribal governments rely on federal dollars. Operating a tribal government is not easy. The BIA often finds itself in the middle, trying to help tribes exercise their sovereign rights, trying to make tribes comply with federal regulations. Operating a tribal government is not easy. I'm going to move on to cultural appropriation and talk about Indian mascots. This seems to be a hot topic, even after 10 or 20 years of it being a hot topic. The most common argument used against the use of Indian mascots is that their use is offensive. Well, being offended is not a cause for change. I could be offended because you burp all the time. There's no way you're going to change. It doesn't make change happen. Being offended is merely the beginning. It's good to know you are offended, and hopefully you would be. Indian mascots serve to sell misinformation and promote stereotypes. Indian mascots use false information about portraying traditional behaviors and expect honor as a result. Indian mascots use logos and terms that are esoteric and secretive or completely unknown. Indian mascots undermine support for diversity and cultural appreciation. So how do they do that? They serve to sell misinformation and promote stereotypes. It assumes that all Indian people do the same physical and verbal behaviors. Stereotypes are used to caricature those behaviors, sometimes even cartooning those behaviors. We are perceived and portrayed as we were 200 years ago, but we're being perceived and portrayed by white people, not by us. It's as if we're invisible today, as if we do not exist. Mascots promote romanticized imagery. The notion of who we are now is completely ignored. Indian mascots use false information and expect honor. Tribal behavior is sometimes just plain made up with no factual or historical basis for what's being done on the football field in particular. Traditional behavior is often expressed out of context. It is assumed that just by doing or including something Indian makes it honorable. Indian mascots use logos and terms that are esoteric, secretive, or completely unknown. Why was a mascot chosen? Sometimes it's a secret. It's not widely known, and it certainly isn't shared. The choice was made by only a few for reasons unknown and probably a long time ago. I went to high school in Rapid City, South Dakota. I love mascot names. because every time you think about the different places you visit, you wonder, oh, I do anyway, what's the team name for that school? So I'm going to get back to my school here in a moment, but I want to take a little journey out. My wife is from a place called Boone, Iowa. Now, Boone, Iowa, the first thing you think of the mascots would probably be like something to do with Daniel Boone. So maybe bears or something forestry or something. They're called the Toreadors. Now, I've asked her, where did that name come from? And, everyone's proud of whatever it is they are. I've heard her explain it as she understands it a few times. I still don't get it. The Boone Toreadors. There was a place called Sturgis that some of you are aware of. And they had two different names. For a while, they were called the Missile Men. And that's because we had Nike missile silos located nearby back in the Cold War era in the 50s. But after those were abandoned, and nobody knew what the connection to that was anyway, they became the Scoopers. Now, I still don't know what the Scoopers have any reference to. It might be known by somebody, but for the most part, people who are Scoopers, who are Toreadors, don't really know why that's who they are. So getting back to my high school story, the Rapid City High School, when there was just one, when I was a senior and through my senior years, we were called the Cobblers. They still are, the Cobblers. That's a little unusual, and our mascot was a cartoon image of a cobbler, the person who fixes shoes. So they have this thing they pound leather on called the last. And that's what we had for our image, our logo. Nobody knew why we were called the Cobblers. When I was teaching there, we sort of did a little investigating. Why are we called the Cobblers? Well, it turns out that we used to be called the Tigers back in the 1920s, the Rapid City Tigers. But there was a beloved coach. When that coach died, they tried to honor him by changing the name of the mascots, the school spirit people. His name was Coach Cobb. And since the 1920s, Rapid City High School became known as the Cobblers. But I know very few people in Rapid City who know why they're called the Cobblers. Why a mascot was chosen is sometimes a secret, not widely known, and sometimes not shared. The choice was made by only a few for reasons unknown, and probably a long time ago. Sometimes it is completely lost as to why this mascot was chosen. No one seems to know for sure, or not at all. Moving to Des Moines, there's a school here, a high school here called East High. They are called the Scarlets. But for some reason, their logo is an Indian head with a full headdress. Being on a minority committee with the school district, we were trying to find out, why are the Scarlets using an Indian head with a full headdress as their logo? We interviewed students, we interviewed teachers, we interviewed administrators, we interviewed community people, we interviewed alumni. We searched back through as many documents as we could find. Nobody could find any rationale for why the East High Scarlets have an Indian head logo. At this point, I can safely say there's nobody that knows why. So where's the honor in keeping something you don't even know why you have it? They're still called the Scarlets. They have removed the Indian head drawings, paintings from their gymnasium walls. They have taken down and removed the cigar store Indian that used to stand in the hallway. But they still have the Indian headdress logo on their letter jackets. So sometimes it's completely lost as to why this mascot was chosen. No one seems to know for sure, and not at all. In the big NFL kind of groups, my thoughts are always why are they called the Padres? Well, I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the Spanish in California. But why would that be an acceptable name to be used for a football team? Maybe somebody knows. Indian mascots undermine support for diversity and cultural appreciation. It encourages the use of epithets, slurs, and disparaging cheers in the name of school spirit. Language used in this kind of sports environment is never intended to be endearing or positive. It elicits behaviors that go against educational efforts to appreciate cultural differences. We are trying so hard to get everyone to appreciate cultural differences, except when you go into a stadium or arena. Then it's okay to say bad things toward the other team if they have one of those cultural names. Most sinister is its appearance at events between two all-Indian boarding schools. As happens in South Dakota, we have a boarding school just north of Sioux Falls, and we have one just east of Pierre, South Dakota, where the capital is located. They are easily 98% or more Indian student population. And when there's a basketball game and there's cheers being done, one of the teams is called the Chieftains and one of the teams is called the Indians. You now have Indian students yelling at the opposing team, kill the Indians, beat the Indians. And the other team yelling, chop the Chieftains, beat the Chieftains. What good is that? Most sinister is appearance at events between Indian schools. Change away from the use of Indian mascot demands a major economic impact on teams. This is going to cost somebody money. If you're successful in the promotion of your team name, you don't want to change that team name. Profit motives are not easily changed. Change costs money. It's a loss of branding. You know, you put those names on tennis shoes and jackets, clothing, letterhead, downward franchising. There's so many little league groups that are using the same logos. You've got a massive inventory someplace that now you're going to have to toss, sell at a discount. Change to a new logo costs money and time. All you got to look at is what FedEx is doing with the Washington Redskins. This is not cheap. And change must be made by a board of directors or owners made up of predominantly successful white men, not a group that easily takes the change. Removal of Indian mascots is more of an economic issue than a moral issue. Been begging for the Redskin name change for decades. All you got to do is get a major company to come in and say, nope, you're going to change it like that. Changing team identity is not as big a risk as first thought. Used to be a big Baltimore Colts fan. They moved to Indianapolis, for crying out loud. They're still called the Colts. Well, you're still a fan. So it doesn't really make that big of a difference. Fan loyalty apparently is a cost. It can be done at a price. And cheers in support of a team should be a stronger notion than cheers against the other team. Being offended does not create change. Negative cheering and improper behaviors in the competitive sports arena is not a way to honor a people. True honor can be done through awards, special recognition, or monetary support. Even though some individual Indian people don't object to the use of mascots, tribes have been consistent in rejecting mascots and supporting their elimination. I support the tribal point of view for one simple reason. The only thing that matters is tribe. Cultural appropriation, product packaging. How things are put together for people to buy. You wouldn't think that would be a big deal for things about Indians, but we are able to improve sales for a lot of things. There's basically only two rules in product packaging. It's very similar to the Indian mascot logic. Number one, if it makes money, do it. Profit motives come first. Will it improve sales if we have an Indian image or logo or some sort of term? Do it. Does it need an image to improve sales? How do you convince me of that? Well, you put that image on the box and see if more people buy it. And it requires board or owner approval. These images that are on these products are not there by accident. They're there on purpose. Number two, these are kind of esoteric choices. Who's making these decisions anyway? Who comes to that board or that owner and say, you need to do this. This will make your sales better. Who does that? It's done more as a secret than as a public forum. And who knows why this image was chosen? See Rule 1, it makes money. So here's some examples of product packaging. And for some reason, America loves to do it with vehicles. And of course, the first one that comes to mind for a lot of people are Jeep Cherokees. On some models, you can actually see they have an Indian head ornament. The more expensive one, of course. They don't have that as much, but it's still visible if you're on the road once in a while. It's the fancy model and has this Indian head. It's not a Cherokee Indian head, it's a Sioux, Dakota Indian head, because that's the one that people associate as a stereotype with Indians in the first place. What the heck is Cherokee and Jeeps? What's that relationship? I don't quite understand it. Never have. Not sure I can find anybody that can tell me either. Pontiac. Pontiac was one of my favorites. Pontiac was an Ottawa, which is a woodland tribe, in the 1760s, and he was a chief of the Ottawa people. Pontiac used to have an Indian head ornament for a long time. They quit doing that in the past few decades. When I was a kid in the 50s, you could write to Pontiac, the corporation, and they would send you a packet full of things like table mats and little comic books, coloring pages, all about the chief Pontiac, and tell you information about Pontiac. But if you ask people that are middle-aged today to young, from say 18 to 40, why is it called Pontiac? They don't know. No one's told them. And of course, now that it's a defunct model, nobody cares. Chevy Cheyenne pickups. Chevy's had this penchant for Indian names for some reason. They had an Apache series in the 1960s. So some of them are still running, apparently. What's the relationship between Apache, Cheyenne, Cherokee, with trucks and Jeeps and so forth? I don't know. And then you've got Winnebago. Winnebago is a woodland tribe, but Chinook is a tribe from the Northwest, up near Seattle, Portland area. So I guess it's just a homage, perhaps? I'm not sure. But you can find these models of Winnebago big vehicles. And then it gets a little crazy. This is a boat trailer. So there's a boat on this trailer, and apparently the model of this trailer is Comanche. Comanche are a desert tribe, more or less. They don't have water. So I don't know why there's a model of boat trailer named Comanche. It's intriguing, which is, once again, I love mascots and I love Indian product packaging. It's like, why is that called that? So here I am at the state fair, people being pulled around on this big trolley by a John Deere tractor, and this is an Apache trolley. You could ride around the state fair, you can see the trolley on the other side going the other direction. Apache, but then they use that Indian head logo, which is a Plains tribe logo. Apache are desert people. I mean, as tribal people, Dakota and Apaches never ever met each other. Who makes this decision? What's the purpose? How does this improve sales? Some of you are aware of this, the Indian motorcycle. The Indian's been around. It's a traditional name among motorcyclists, kind of like Harley Davidson. They're really connected. People know about them. I don't know why they're called Indian. I'm guessing you could probably find out since they're still being manufactured. And we move into, well, what about little engines? So here's a Tecumseh. It's a little engine. They have to have an Indian head logo again. The same stereotypical one, the one that people expect to see when you put Indian down there, even though Tecumseh is a woodland tribe, essentially chief. Who knows why that's connected to this little engine? And then we can really get it up to, well, now we got planes. So here's a plane. It's a model called the Seminole. I'm not sure which company makes it, but apparently they feel and have been convinced by calling this model Seminole, we're going to sell more planes. Would be interesting to find out if they did, if they changed it to Presley, the Presley plane. I don't know if that would sell more models or not. And then we have odds and ends. And by odds and ends, I'm thinking, I have dozens and dozens of these kind of photos of product packaging. I'm only picking a few here for you. But to think of how really odd it gets, here's Indian Chief bread. I have long since forgotten where I took that picture. I don't know who makes it. It's Indian Chief bread, but that's supposed to be sort of a totem pole, which once again is a Northwest coast tribal kind of image. It's, I guess, means that people recognize the Indian part better, since the chief is apparently not enough. Many of you probably know this one. This is from Target. This is Cherokee, and the part that's cut off says M-A-N, man. These are clothes, a clothing tag for clothes that are for men at Target. And even though it's Cherokee, here's that headdress again, the Plains style headdress, which has become so much the stereotype of what Indian means. The blurred image here, you can still see the headdress again. Savage, it's a 22 single shot rifle. So you've got the name Savage. Apparently that's not good enough. You have to have the image to go with it. And so the image they choose is the Indian headdress. Calumet, baking powder, argo cornstarch. These are more stylized. I don't know why, but you don't want to change any of these because these work apparently. So we're keeping the image. These are axe handles. Indian Fire. I guess one uses a label that doesn't have a logo. The other uses a label with a logo. I'm guessing there's not enough room to put a headdress on. That's why they have a different feathered look. But it's still pretty much a plains, possibly woodland tribe. Would I be able to find anyone at this company that could tell me why they do that? I'm thinking no. And then when we get to odd, it really gets crazy here. Power of Pete. Why there's a Indian chief kind of looking guy, I don't know. I am just amazed sometimes. You have to look carefully at this picture. This is one of my favorites. We have what look like three Indian chiefy kind of guys, and they are truly dressed up in really pretty authentic Indian outfits and regalia. But I want you to notice what has color in this photograph. This is a page taken out of a magazine. What has color in this photograph? If you look, it's the chair. Because this is an advertisement for the chair, the brand of chair. And the caption simply reads something similar to, "We are proud of our tradition of making quality chairs." And somehow they make the connection with Indians. And that viewers looking at this will say, I got to have that chair. I like those Indian images. That chair must be a good chair. Because if it makes money, we're going to keep doing it. Why is it the image that's chosen? I don't know. I think it's a secret. No one shared it with me. It's out there. I'm going to move on to powwows. Powwows are traditional gathering opportunities among plains and woodland CSA cultural study areas. They're for social interaction. They occur over a multi-day period, include dating, music, ceremonies, trade, and food. Most powwow events today are public. There's a few private ones, but that's pretty rare. They tend to be held in the summer. Each year they number in the dozens or scores. Most are outdoor events. Some occur in indoor arenas. Many are camping oriented. Most are full weekend events. They're scheduled and they take place in what are called circuits throughout the United States. So one circuit might be most of Georgia and Florida. Another might be New York and parts of Pennsylvania and Maine and so forth. So the circuits around here are big because we have a lot of tribes, and these circuit schedules are posted and published. You can look them up on the internet in particular. It's considered family time, inclusive of all ages and genders. A significant activity at any powwow is dancing. Dancing can be ceremonial, competitive, or social. Ceremonial includes grand entry and honoring songs. Social are song opportunities in which anyone can dance. You don't need an outfit to do that. And competitive dancers can actually receive cash awards. Competitive dancers are divided into gender and age groups. So the categories are usually young girls and young boys, women and elder women, men and elder men. The dancers are further divided into gender and age categories: traditional and fancy. Traditional and fancy. Traditional means natural clothing, objects, and decorations, or more of them, more of the earth tones or traditional colors, and songs that have traditional meanings and are sometimes considered old songs. In powwow dancing, traditional in men means they wear traditional clothing styles with natural objects, and headdress styles more traditional depending on the tribe, and the dance style and music often tells a story. For women, traditional, they wear traditional clothing, usually shawls and dresses with natural colors. The elder women dance with purpose and power. Women lend power to the dance and to the song. For fancy, contemporary, more modern, color, 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 and sometimes a little more color. Contemporary modern materials are used in their outfits. Some of it's new music. They dance to the old stuff too, but some especially created for fancy dancers. It's really fast. For men fancy dancers, some of them, depending on the tribe, make their outfits using long colored yarn, multicolored yarn. Others use feathered bustles on their shoulders and their backs. The term I like in watching men fancy dancers is walking mobile. They're extremely fast. It's very aerobic. Women fancy dancers, usually two kinds: jingle dancers and shawl dancers. The jingle dress, these are dresses or outfits that are decorated with the lids of tobacco cans or chew. They're folded into these kind of pyramid-shaped things and then sewn onto the dress so they click with each other, and that makes a little jingly noise. The shawls are heavily decorated, lots of fringe and colorful. And when you're spinning and moving quickly, you make all these noises and you see this blur of color go by you, and it is also very aerobic. The drum, communal drumming, that's a unique thing among Indian people, not only throughout the world and the world cultures, but through time. Communal drumming, many drummers with one drum. Doesn't happen in any other cultures that I'm aware of. All individuals playing one drum are called the drum. And these drums create names for themselves. The MC or host at the powwow refers to a drum by their chosen name when they're asked to play a song. And drums also compete for cash awards, as do dancers. Powwows always start with a grand entry. Dance competition events are interspersed with social dances, and this is usually done to allow competition dancers a break, because this is going to go on all night. Young dancers first, then women's traditional, then men's traditional, then women's fancy, then men's fancy, but that order can vary depending on the tribes. Judges are on the dance floor to determine winners. Families often go on powwow circuits to compete, socialize, trade and sell regalia, and maintain traditions with their children. Depending on who sponsors the powwow will determine prize money for dancing events. You are all invited to come and watch, buy Indian-made and non-Indian-made items, including good food, and participate in social dances. Powwows can be a truly enjoyable experience. Cultural music traditions. Tribes can be divided for study, as we talked about earlier, into 8 cultural study areas. Music traditions will vary for each and every cultural study area. Because of modern powwow circuits, more music is becoming generic with a strong leaning toward the Plains Cultural Study Area's style of music and dance. Traditional music can be categorized as purposeful, perhaps to sort of support an activity like actually work, music while you work, or music to help you work better. It uses available materials for making making instruments. You use what you got. And the songs more often tell a story or express a feeling. Traditional music reflects a tradition of recognizing good singers. In every village, we know who the good singers are. 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we always knew who the good singer was. Traditional Indian music maintains connections to tribal and traditional culture. Some resources I would share with you for Indian music. For traditional music, take a look at the Porcupine Singers, the Black Lodge Singers. The Porcupine Singers are from South Dakota. Black Lodge Singers are from Montana. If you think you want to get more contemporary, you can always look at Carlos, I can't remember his name, who does the flute thing. There's a lot of flute music out there. I like Brule. He's kind of hip-hop-ishy. And then there's a lot of songs on the soundtrack from the movie Smoke Signals that I would definitely say if you're interested in contemporary songs, those would be good. So for a quick review, there are 300 tribes in America. We talked about that before. The Census Bureau says there's about 5 million Indians who self-identify in America. The Bureau of Indian Affairs says people who are members of federally recognized tribes only number about 2 million. We distinguish cultural behaviors from poverty behaviors. We recognize that tribal sovereignty is the exercise of tribal rights. We looked at some traditions, including quill work, star quilts, contributions, and powwows. Mascots and product packaging are appropriations of some of these traditions. And through personalities, we've learned there are still Indian people doing and being first in whatever it is their endeavor is in America. Indian is only a name, but as I've said time and time again, and most importantly, the only thing that matters is tribe. It's the end of part 3. I recognize there are some resources that you would be good with. While you're looking at that, I'm going to take a risk here and finish with a little song. Wakantanka o wanike, wakantanka o wanike, o wanike, wakantanka o wanike, oh hey 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 oh. Wakantanka o shi mahana ye ye, well ye ye, well ye ye, wakantanka.
That was great, Eugene. That was great.
Thank you.
You have a good voice.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know how to get out of this exactly. Okay. Are you in control now?
Sure.
Okay, good.
So here's a question for you. Has a tribe ever sued over the use of their name or image? And if so, what was the result?
Ever sued over the name of their image? I don't think I know the answer to that because it may have happened, it may not.
Mm-hmm.
The tribes, I'm not sure if a lawsuit is their mechanism for doing whatever it is they do. So I know that their support or lack of it for mascots is usually done through literature and through other things. They all do what's, in terms of tribal government, they pass resolutions, I guess is the best way to think of it. So that's why it's not so much lawsuits as what tribes have resolutions that say we don't support the use of mascots. Mm-hmm. That's where you would find those tribal government supports for that. I'm not aware of lawsuits per se, not to say it doesn't exist, they just don't.
Sure. Okay. And then someone else asked, what did the song mean to you? Did the song have meaning?
I did want to share that.
Yes.
There are actual lyrics to that. That song is a Dakota song, and it's called Wakantanka. And Wakantanka means great spirit, God, holy mystery. And the words in almost all Indian songs, the lyrics are short. They're just repeated over and over and over. So how many times you repeat something is called a push-up, typically for most songs. So this only had 1 or 1.5 push-ups. And the lyrics simply say, great spirit, have mercy on us, we're pitiful people. Mm-hmm. And we use that song as a way to center ourselves so that I find I sing it in my mind sometimes if I'm getting ready to do something and think about something and I just want to get a little more control. And I only learned it about 20 years ago. So for me, it's new, and it's something I really grab onto the more and more that I do it.
Okay, we have another question. What is the American Indian perspective on gender identity and gender fluidity? And is it different by tribe? Do different tribes have different perspectives on that?
The short answer is yes, that they have different perspectives. The short answer also means that historically and culturally, most tribes are accepting of this multi-gender kind of approach to life. And we can use my tribe. There are special names for people who are transsexual, intersexual, and in many cases, and amongst other tribes that I do know about, these people are perceived as special, having special gifts, and they can be seen as a resource in many cases. So it depends on the tribe as to how strong that can be in terms of the resource. I don't know of any, it doesn't mean that it's not, but I'm not aware of any tribes that that push out those kind of people. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that they've all been accepted within the tribe to the point that some tribes have special names for those people, those individuals with those kind of talents, skills, abilities, etc.
And another question for you. What do you think about the use of the word tribe now is becoming more popular, especially in education? A lot of times they talk about kids finding their tribe, to prevent bullying and to increase the feeling of fitting in junior high and high school, the feeling of they're using the word tribe. Yeah, I guess it's just an increased use of the word tribe.
I'm not opposed to it. It doesn't have any real cultural meaning in the sense that what we talk about. I see it as, you could use the word clan. Does that make it Scottish in some manner?
Right.
No,
Mm-hmm.
It's just another term to help people feel part of something.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word that will do it for you. That's fine. But in terms of what the definition that we use, uh, the tribe is a specific organization that's
Sure.
identified, by the federal government.
Sure. Any other questions for Eugene this evening?
I did want to say someone did send me a request, and I will get to it. It's been a busy season, but
Mm-hmm.
I promise I will get back to you. And like I said, my email address is Fracek, Fracek, @q.com, just the letter Q. And I put it back up, and I close my I close my PowerPoint.
That's okay. There will be a link at the end. Oh, Holly put it into chat. Thank you, Holly. There'll be a link at the end for a survey everybody will be getting in their email. And we do have one more question. Where can we go from here? Someone asks. So I'm not sure if they're looking for more information or if they're wondering maybe if they can do something to help with the poverty on the Indian reservations, maybe. I'm not sure exactly what they.
Some of the poverty issues that started during the reservation period are slowly making themselves less of a problem because we now have more tribal members who have college degrees, who have political experience, who are able to figure out where the points you need to touch to make some change. That never really happened before. And we were always just plain subject to the paternalistic aspects that came from the federal government. But now we've got a lot more Indian people that at least know where you need to push to make something happen. So I think we're making our own efforts.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a bit of a struggle, but we have the resources to do some of this for ourselves now and not be so dependent on the white culture. And as I say that, I also have to say, without the support of white people who are sensitive to the needs that we have had, we could not be surviving today. So that has always been true. And there are many instances, the Miriam Report in 1928, the kind of activities throughout the 1934 legislation and all the legislation that has been passed by Congress hasn't not been passed by Indian legislators.
Mm-hmm.
These are white legislators doing this on our behalf.
Good. Someone asks what your favorite book is, and someone else asks if you have a bibliography you would like to share.
I don't have a favorite book, but I also don't have a favorite movie. So I do have lists, and what I am starting is a list of authors, because I find that rather than the books, I find the authors to be of more value. And what I will do is I will send that list to you that I have of the authors.
Okay.
And when we talk about resources as a librarian, you know that it was better in the 1970s to read a book copyrighted in the 1970s because they could probably talk to Indian people that were still able to talk about firsthand experiences on the reservation.
Sure.
This is 2020. The reservation life is totally different. Cultural traditions are being impacted by globalization. So all those things change the perception of who we are.
Mm-hmm. In particular, now someone is asking, what do you think of Kent Nervern books?
I'm afraid I am not familiar with that person. That's just a check on me, not on Kent.
And someone else says they're glad to see 1491 on your bookshelf.
Oh yeah, those are good books, but it's a combination of quasi-documentary, making up history along the way. I find those useful in terms of a resource for myself.
And then someone asked about the pendant that you're wearing, and is it traditional?
Yes, this is, you can find kind of an explanation in a book called Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. And this is a elk tooth. And it simply is one of the spirit helpers among Dakota people. And I had it given as a gift at one point. So.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you again. Thank you everyone for attending, and watch for in your email to get the survey. And then, as I said, we'll be posting the recordings into Facebook. This was just a wonderful program, Eugene. We all really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you everyone for attending this evening.